Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
Now, let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week?
So recently, the International Olympic Committee decided to allow 15-year-old Russian skater Kamila Valieva to skate after it was revealed that she failed a drug test for TMZ, a drug that can increase stamina and blood flow to the heart. Many athletes called out the unfair nature of allowing Valieva to continue competing in the Olympics, especially after Valieva and the Russian team already won a gold medal, including sprinter Sha'Carri Richardson, who was banned from the Tokyo Olympic Games after testing positive for marijuana. In a tweet, Richardson wrote, quote, "Can we get a solid answer on the difference of her situation and mine's? My mother died and I can't run. And I was also favored to place top 3. The only difference I see is I'm a black young lady." End quote. Valieva's team defended her, explaining that she may have accidentally come into contact with trace amounts of the drug because her grandfather takes it. According to IOC member Dennis Oswald, Valieva's age was also considered as a part of their decision, stating, quote, "The main element was if the athlete was to be suspended, the athlete would not be able to participate in the games and the damage to her career would be irreparable, whereas the medal can always be withdrawn," end quote. So, Andre, that begs the question, do you think the Richardson's accusation of racism on the Olympics part is founded?
So, before I give my answer, I want to say first that Richardson's punishment was handed out by the United States Anti Doping Agency officials, not by the International Olympic Committee, the IOC. And Valieva's case is still ongoing. Russian doping authorities were responsible for Valieva's current lack of punishment. The IOC has appealed to the Court of Arbitration for Sport for judgment. And the CAS allowed Valieva to continue to skate, but both the CAS and the IOC have left open the possibility that Valieva will be retroactively banned and any medals awarded will be stripped, as reported by Jay Busby on Yahoo Sports. And with all that being said, I still agree that Richardson's accusation was founded because it opens up a long-standing conversation about racism in sports. I mean, we know for a fact that Black athletes are treated, scored, and punished differently than their white counterparts. I mean,
Absolutely.
we've seen it time and time again throughout the history of sports. In an article written by Colin Seal, he cites 3 specific examples of racism within the sports industry. The first example, Simone Biles, had her historic achievement diminished by the International Gymnastics Federation when she created a move so complex that the judges awarded her a J on the International A to I scale of difficulty. As a result, the International Gymnastics Federation, the FIG, updated their ranking system. Even though no one in the world aside from her can do the move, FIG reassigned the move a difficulty rating of H. They justified this by claiming that her move carries increased risk for gymnasts, including a potential of landing on the neck. Now, I don't know about you, Daquon, but every gymnast move I've seen looks like it can result on landing on your neck. I don't...
Absolutely death-defying.
And now another incident too that Seal brings up is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and other gifted athletes in that field. The NCAA banned dunks from 1967 to 1977, citing safety concerns and damaged equipment as their reasoning. But Seal points out that it was mighty funny how this ban was instituted during Kareem's dominance, leading UCLA to a 30-0 season in a national championship. In the last incident, that Seal discusses is in regard to Rich Paul, an agent to National Basketball Association superstars like LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And Paul has negotiated over $625 million in contract deals. Yet this did not stop the NCAA from creating a certification process for agents that required them to have a bachelor's degree. That was later rescinded after observers noted it as the Rich Paul rule because Paul obtained his tremendous success despite not earning a bachelor's degree. So while this specific circumstance with Richardson's versus Valieva can be argued from a lens outside of race, what Sha'Carri brings to light is a long-standing issue in the industry as a whole, I think.
Yeah, I think in regards to the Valieva Richardson kind of argument, I think that it's very important, even though I fully recognize that these are two completely different circumstances and there's
Exactly.
different factors in play. I do think that it is important to recognize different instances of racism in sports because it really informs us
Yes.
of Richardson's mindset. Because I think of it like if you are conditioned to see racism everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
you are going to continue to see things that trigger that thought in your mind that there is racism. And we
Exactly.
see so many instances of racism in sports, especially at the Olympics. For example, even in when Richardson was banned from the Olympic Games because she tested positive for marijuana, that same year there were Olympians who had marijuana businesses
Mm-hmm.
that were promoted. And that
Mm-hmm.
kind of contrast, I know, had to hurt her, as well as all of the racist remarks, frankly, that she was met with after
Yeah.
it came out. Because I think that gets to when Richardson was saying in a later tweet how she was like, after it came out that she tested positive for marijuana, they slandered her name. So
Mm-hmm.
many people were sending her so many different racist remarks and everything like that. And so,
Mm-hmm.
again, that informs how she thinks about this situation, as well as, other Olympians like Simone Biles, who also received racist remarks after she withdrew from the Olympic Games for her mental health. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's another important part in this conversation, thinking about mental health, because I noticed that in this instance, there is a lot of sympathy for Valieva's mental health, that,
Yes.
a lot of this can be very damaging to her and her career and her mental health because, frankly, if you are a 15-year-old and every single news outlet is calling you like the girl who got away with doping at the Olympics,
Mm-hmm.
that can create some type of damage, some type of trauma. Yet the same isn't allowed or afforded to Black athletes in the same way. So I do think that when thinking about Richardson's claims, you have to understand the perspective that she holds as a Black woman who has faced racism in sports in general.
I fully agree. I think that there is a lack of empathy, a lack of sympathy. And I think it also begs that kind of really problematic idea of the strong Black woman.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, in society, Black women are not given the space to be vulnerable, not given the space to be able to release that pain that they're going through because the world tells them, well, suck it up or be better or be stronger or be you just gotta keep fighting. And at some
Right.
point, everybody has a breaking point. And I think that, while Sha'Carri is older and they kept using that as the excuse and stuff like that too, I also think that the fact is she lost her mom. And
Right.
the fact that there was not that same the fact that the issue was more with her using the drug versus why she did it. In this case, it was the reverse, where Valieva, it was talking about why she might have gotten the drug or what might have been going on versus, she took a drug. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So that same space of vulnerability, that same discussion is not given. That same allowance is not given to African American people, specifically African American women. And this is also not the first time that the Olympics have made it very clear that Black people and people of color are not welcome and have used their rules as a cover for their racism. I mean, in an article written by Caroline Kitchener, we learned that for many years there was only one kind of swim cap. It was ultra tight, made of latex or silicone, and it was considered a one size fits all. But those swim caps left out a large group of swimmers, adding to the structural inequalities that often keep people of color out of the pool. Many swimmers have celebrated recent advancements in swim cap technology. Several brands like Soul Cap have introduced options that were more flexible in their material and that vary in size, accommodating swimmers with hair that is larger and more textured than their white counterparts. But Soul Cap submitted their product to the International Swimming Federation, FINA, for approval, but they denied that request. And the organization said that the design does not fit the natural form of the head. And to the best of their knowledge, the athletes competing at the international events never use nor require caps of such size and configuration. So I just wanted to ask, like, this sounds a lot like gatekeeping to me, Daquon. What about you?
It sure does. And I think that this gets at a larger question of really redefining or creating new rules for the
Yeah.
Olympics. We have to figure the Olympics is one of the largest competitive stages in the world. You have all of these countries sending their best elite athletes to
Mm-hmm.
compete in all different types of sports. And we have certain rules that are in place that can create barriers and also unfair advantages for certain groups of people. And I
Exactly.
think in this case, we are seeing a unfair advantage for younger Olympians because I know that there's some rule about because Valieva is 15, she cannot be held accountable in the same way that older athletes are held accountable.
Like
And I
Richardson,
think
yeah.
there are conversations about getting this rule out. And I think that this should be a wake up call for the Olympics to really reconsider all of the different rules and make sure that we are creating an equitable field for everyone.
I fully agree. I think that, like you just said, we're still using a rule book that was created by racist, misogynistic white men who never considered the thoughts and feelings of people of color or Black people when creating these rules. Until these rules, until these rules include people that look like us making the decisions, we will always run into these kind of issues. I think there needs to be a panel or open forum of discussion with people of various racial backgrounds to reevaluate whether or not these rules and regulations in place ostracize a certain group of people for whatever reason. And if those rules are found to be in breach of inclusion, then those rules need to be modified or taken out altogether. I think that we're
Right.
still playing this game with a deck that was already stacked against us.
Hmm. Just like many other things that were stacked against us.
And I think
So
there's
I completely agree that we need new rules.
exactly. And I think there was a fence metaphor. I don't know about that. You know about that, Daquan?
Yeah. So in the fence metaphor, there's this idea of like a baseball game in the fence. And
Mm-hmm.
so we think of equality as everybody gets the same thing. But if somebody's like 6'4", they can already see above the fence without even needing a box. But if
Mm-hmm.
somebody's like 4'5", even with the box, they may still have trouble seeing over the fence. That's
Mm-hmm.
just equality. Equity would be everybody getting what they need individually. So that 6'4" person may not get a box, but the 4'5" person would get an even higher box than
Mm-hmm.
what they would normally get if it's just equal across the board. But the true thing that we should be fighting for is justice. And that's reconsidering why is there offense in the first place? So I really agree with your point of just like thinking about creating a committee to reevaluate the rules, figure out why were these put into place for the first place, and are these creating unnecessary barriers for athletes in the Olympics?
Exactly. As teacher shortages reach a breaking point across the country, many states have begun to relax qualification requirements for substitute teachers, such as Kansas's decision to lower the age to be a substitute teacher to 18. However, one decision that has caught extreme controversy was Oklahoma Republican Governor Kevin Stitt's executive order that allowed all state employees to substitute teach while retaining their salaries and benefits. In the weeks that followed, the Moore Police Department shared photos of their officers in Moore public schools. However, the post came with backlash, with concerned citizens questioning why these officers showed up armed and in uniform. Oklahoma Democratic State Senator Kerry Hicks called the decision a short sighted solution to the challenges our schools have been facing for 22 months during the global pandemic. She goes on to state that we do not have an interchangeable workforce. The executive order shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the problem. It diminishes teachers' contributions and expertise in the field of education, undermines the safety of our classrooms, and ignores the complexity involved in educating a child. So, Daquon, I have to ask you, do you think that the decision to lower sub requirements and allow state personnel like cops to become substitutes is an effective solution to the teacher shortage?
Exasperated sigh. I think my lack of words at the moment speaks volumes to how I feel about this because it is crazy to think about having fully armed cops in a classroom. In fact, I am absolutely appalled at the idea of cops being fully armed and fully in uniform teaching students because regardless of how you feel about cops, it is jarring and completely unnerving having the teacher in front of you being armed with a gun, a taser, baton, mace, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
especially when we consider the communities that are statistically more likely to be affected by these teacher shortages, which are Black and Latinx communities,
Mm-hmm.
communities that need teachers the most, because we are talking about students who, time and time again, had to see people who look like them killed by the police. Students who grew up seeing Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Amir Locke, all of them
Mm-hmm.
unjustly killed. It is impossible to learn in an environment where you feel worried about if your name would be the next hashtag to add to the list.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more, Daquan. I am terrified for the Black students attending the classes of a school with armed police officers in full police uniform as substitutes. Uh, what's going to happen if a fight breaks out or an argument? Hell, what's going to happen if a Black student reaches into their backpack or pocket? Is the police officer going to suddenly magically see a gun? Is he going to fear for the lives of the white children in the classroom and decide to shoot first and ask questions later, to choke first and subdue the threat he believes Black people to be? And let's not forget that Oklahoma is not exactly a safe haven for police brutality. I
Not
mean,
at all.
in an article written on Oklahoma Watch by Whitney Bryan, we learned that Oklahoma City and Tulsa are among the deadliest cities in the nation for police killings. Not only that, but Oklahoma has nearly 13,000 full time and reserve officers, and just shy of 1,300 have been trained in crisis prevention, which means that fewer than 10% of officers are certified in de escalation and crisis prevention training. The odds of schools in Oklahoma receiving a police officer who has not been trained to deal with crisis prevention is a staggering 10-to-1 ratio, which only makes the likelihood of a Black life being unjustly lost that much greater. And can someone please explain to me how relaxing the qualifications for a substitute teacher makes the school any safer for the students attending? I mean, exactly how much are you relaxing the rules? Because there is a reason why there's a vetting process. It
Right.
exists for a reason. It's supposed to keep the wrong people from being around impressionable children. It's sounding a lot more like creating dangerous problems than finding an adequate solution. I mean, what do you think, Daquon? Like,
I completely agree, especially when you consider that a large part of the police force have some type of relationship with domestic violence in terms of being the aggressors of domestic violence. I
yeah.
don't know the exact statistics, but I do
Hmm.
know that there are statistics out there that show that a large number of police officers either have admitted to domestically abusing a spouse, or even if they didn't admit to it, they have that kind of accusation on their heads anyway.
Hmm.
So I think that that by itself just rubs somebody the wrong way. And I also think that this is not a solution. This is
No.
not no type of effective solution. In fact, it actively diminishes the work that teachers do inside of the classroom. I feel like the greatest solution to the teacher shortage is, listening to teachers. And I come from the perspective of a former educator myself.
Hmm.
When I entered the classroom, before I even started meeting my students and teaching them, I created a vision statement. My vision was to be fearless in creating a welcoming, affirming community where students can learn and grow into their best selves. I was on a personal journey to become a transformative educator where I committed to teaching students not just how to survive, but how to thrive in a world that tells them that they can't and reassure them that they can. In
Hmm.
everything I wanted to do, I wanted to remember that education can be the site of radical liberation by those who have been pushed to the margins of society, an oppressive society. And I wanted to equip my students with the tools to be disruptors and change agents for equity
Hmm.
and justice. When I
Hmm.
was an educator, I was honored to have the privilege to change lives, and I brought my best self every single day. I
Hmm.
remained open to feedback. Tried every single learning opportunity in the book, and I did everything in my power to fight for our future. And frankly, it wasn't enough. In
Hmm.
fact, the things that I was told and the things that I was forced to do, I felt like was doing the exact opposite of my vision. I felt like what I was told to do was only perpetuating these systems of harm. And so if you're not listening to what teachers want in the classroom, whether it's, creating a welcoming, affirming environment for all students, not
Hmm.
just white cis het students, all black and brown, queer, everybody. Or whether it's, having livable wages so they're not working 2, 3 jobs on top of teaching, making sure that they have balanced lesson plans, making sure that they have time to just deal with the bodily functions. Like, I knew teachers who barely had time to just get a drink of water or go to the bathroom or even eat the entire day. And it's absolutely ridiculous because as a teacher, when the pandemic first started, everybody was like, "You're a hero. We love you. You're doing such great work." And then when teachers, you know, actually ask for things, when they demand change for justice, when they ask for basic human necessities, it's like, "Oh, you're being lazy. Oh, you want to leave the classroom? You're abandoning your students. You're failing your students," and all of this. And it's like, that is why there is a teacher shortage right now. That is why there are teacher unions across the country that are planning strikes and protests. It's
Hmm.
because these systems are not listening to teachers and treating them like human beings. So just to replace them with cops, if I thought I was doing harm just by what I was told, I can't even imagine the harm that this is doing to the students of our country.
Well said, Daquan. I think that I've always found it quite disturbing at how little respect we have for teachers in our society as a whole. Because Teachers, especially the ones during the most formative years of growth, that's, K through 12, have a massive impact on the generation. On average, students spend about 7 hours a day at school, 5 days a week, not counting after school or extracurricular activities for 180 days a year. The fact that we don't pay teachers a higher salary or give them access to the necessary resources to create an amazing learning environment is baffling, because most teachers teach because it's their passion. Yet we've created a society where that particular passion has a cap out point. And if they want to make any more money, they either have to make a second job or pursue alternative career options. The fact that they are just letting anyone step in and take care of their students who will inevitably shape our future, I mean, come on. Like, I just want to ask you, Daquon, do you think that having people that have no training, no experience with dealing with children diminishes the value of highly qualified teachers?
Absolutely. Because what this does is say, all we need is a body in the classroom. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
All we need is somebody to just babysit the students while they're there, and then we can move on. And I think that absolutely diminishes everything that a teacher does, from getting to know their students, building those relationships with not only the students, but the families,
Yeah,
creating complex lesson plans, differentiating instruction for different students' needs. That's not something you can just do with no type of training whatsoever. And even if you do have some type of formalized training, it's still not enough. So I think
mm-hmm.
that it's one of those things where I feel like as a country in education, we are moving away from really solving the root of, problems in education, and just trying to create this cookie cutter standard education where it's just like, all right, we can take this curriculum, take a lot of scripted curriculum, which is being a lot more popular nowadays, and we can just give it to anybody, and that's going to solve all of our problems in education. No, we need highly effective teachers in the classroom who actually care about their students.
Exactly. And I think I get a little personal here. But I had a teacher in fifth grade who treated me like I was the scum of the earth. She emotionally abused me for all of my fifth grade year, and that abuse carried over to the students I was in class with when I got to sixth grade, because they were the ones in fifth grade. Um, these years were a particularly dark point in my life, so low to the point where I thought the world would be better off without me. This teacher created a trauma within me that I'm still working through and processing at 23 years old, almost a decade later. So imagine just for a second how disastrous it would be for a police officer with no training and a racist ideology that's embedded in the police force, how that could change the way a Black child views themselves for years to come. Even just for one day they're there, or 1 week that police officer is there. Just imagine. Just imagine.
So, adding on to the onslaught of controversial legislation pushed by Florida's Republicans, the Parental Rights in Education bill was passed by the Florida Senate Education Committee. The bill, dubbed as the Don't Say Gay bill from opponents, would prohibit schools from encouraging, quote, classroom discussions about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary grade levels, or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students, end quote. Furthermore, it would allow parents to sue schools if they did not provide information regarding a student's, quote, mental, emotional, or physical health or well being, end quote. This includes, as confirmed by Florida Republican State Senator Dennis Baxley, information about a child's sexuality or gender identity, essentially forcing school officials to out their students to their parents. Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis voiced his support the bill, stating that LGBTQ plus curriculum, quote, is entirely inappropriate. Schools need to be teaching kids to read, to write. They need to teach them science, history. We need more civics, end quote. However, many LGBTQ plus advocacy groups and even President Biden himself have condemned the bill as hateful and harmful to youth. So, Andre, I want to ask you, is the parental rights in education bill problematic or protective of parents' rights over their child's education?
It is incredibly problematic and incredibly disrespectful. Whether you agree with it or not, LGBTQIA people exist. LGBTQI people have always been here and will always be here. And Governor DeSantis, I want to address you specifically. Stop using a smokescreen fallacy to excuse your racism, homophobia, and bigotry. You don't really care about education in schools, because if you did, you'd know that adding education doesn't take away from learning. This is the second time that you're involved in trying to create legislation and policy to specifically attack a marginalized community because it conflicts with your white Christian ideals. You are part of the problem. And people like you are the reason that Daquon and I will never stop fighting for the marginalized, because if we ever do, people like you will continue to tear us down and stifle our voices. This policy isn't in an effort to protect the mental health of children. This policy is to protect heteronormativity. This policy is to ensure that conservative parents can find out whether or not their child is gay without their permission. If you truly cared about the mental well-being of children, you know that outing a student to their parents could get them violently abused, kicked out of their home, or worse, killed. School is supposed to be a safe space for all students, not just straight white students. And this policy is creating an incredibly hostile environment for LGBTQIA people. And I just want to pass this question back on to you, Daquon. Do you think this bill is problematic?
Is the sky blue? Because obviously, if you can read and write and see or listen or hear just about anything, you would know that this bill is absolutely problematic.
Yeah.
Because, oh, Ronnie boy, I'm going to call him Ron. Ron, I'm talking to you. Ron, we have a problem. Because obviously you do not actually care about the students in Florida. You do not actually care about the parental rights of parents for their children's education. Because if you cared about students, you would know that it is so important for students to be able to see representations of themselves. It's so important for students to be able to have, effective discussions in a place like a classroom where they are moderated and, there are teachers in place who have an education, have training, and have the capacity to facilitate useful discussions. You would also know that there are queer people who wrote some of America's best literature out there, the best literature in the world, actually. You would also know that there is queer scientists who have been on the precipice of so many innovations across the globe. You would also know that queer people are in our history. Queer history is a part of American history. And you would also know that when it comes to civic duties, queer people exercise it the most when it comes to making sure and protesting for their rights. Because for a long time, we didn't have it. And so just that claim that you make is absolutely unfounded. Queer and LGBTQ plus curriculum can provide a safe space for so many queer youth in our country, especially when we consider that in the past 2 years, a majority of queer youth have seriously considered suicide, especially when we consider that out of youth surveyed by the Trevor Project, only 1 in 3, children find that their house is LGBTQ affirming.
Hmm.
And if you also cared about the parental rights, all of parents' rights to their child education, you would not let a bill like this pass.
Hmm.
Because a bill like this says, for the homophobic and bigoted parents, we care about your rights. For other parents, we don't care about what you want your child to learn. Because imagine a child not being able to learn, about themselves or anything like that. And, of course, people will always say, well, you can teach them all that LGBTQ stuff at home. But if that child learned something at home and they went to their teacher the next day and was like, teacher, guess what I learned over the weekend? And they told them, and the teacher was like, that is inappropriate for school. We're not going to talk about that. Think about how devastated that child is. And if they feel a special connection to that type of material, they're going to be even more devastated about who they are as an individual. They're going to start believing that they are inappropriate for school. School is not for them. In fact, a lot of things are not for them because these thoughts are inappropriate. They are immoral.
Yeah, I think there is so much misinformation about gay love and romance in conservative circles specifically. You see, these conservative people, usually, let's be real, religious types, Christians, love to use the sexual angle when discussing gay representation discussions around sexuality and gender identity. I mean, even in this bill, it's looking at it through a sexual lens when it states that they don't want to prohibit the class, they want to prohibit the classroom discussion in primary grade levels or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students. I mean, what exactly do they think they'll be telling these children when it relates to gay people? Gay love is not synonymous with sex. Just as straight love can be innocent and age appropriate, so can gay love. I mean, I don't know about you, Daquon, but I could name dozens and dozens of kids shows that show mommies and daddies in relationships, several kids and teen shows that talk about what it's like to have a crush, what it's like to ask someone to a dance or on a date, first kisses, and so on several different age ranges with storylines that are appropriate to the age that they are talking to. What the fuck makes you think that we can't do the same thing with a gay or lesbian relationship? And if it is so problematic and so inappropriate to see gay people or to see any kind of sexual orientation, then let's erase all of it. No parents, no romantic relationships or love story arcs whatsoever. Every single iteration, even remotely suggesting a relationship between two characters, needs to be kept away from children. And if you think that's a stupid idea or that it doesn't make any sense, then stop saying that you're protecting your children. Stop saying that you don't want them to see gay relationships because they are inappropriate, and stop saying that you don't want schools encouraging those kinds of conversations. Be honest. You aren't protecting your kids. You're shielding them from a real part of society that you don't agree with. Gay relationships aren't inappropriate. You're just regurgitating a mistranslated scripture from a book where most of you conveniently ignore the part where it said that your God will use the same judgment you put on others to judge you. But we ain't gonna talk about that because it's another episode. And you aren't really afraid that talks about sexual orientation and gender identity will encourage your child to be a part of the LGBTQIA community. You're afraid that if schools do discuss it, your child will realize who they are, and that is what scares you. That's what terrifies you. But let me tell you a secret. You see, my family never allowed me to be around or even see LGBTQIA people. Gay love was always talked about as something that was immoral, disgusting, and of course, of the devil. And my school never, ever had an open space where it was discussed in a normal, healthy way. And guess what? A bitch is still gay as fuck.
Per. And you know what? I'll take it to the next level. They're not just scared about their child figuring out who they are. They're scared that the child will figure out how wrong the parent is. And that's going
Mm.
to check their ego. that is going to hurt them so hard in their ego and pride, because the child is going to realize that all of the homophobic rhetoric that the parent is spitting is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's foundless.
Mm-hmm.
And they are going to be like, you don't know everything that you think you do. You are
Mm-hmm.
not this authority figure that has it out for the best of me like you
Mm-hmm.
think you are. And that hurts a parent. That hurts them straight in their ego. And I also want to say that when a bill like this is passed, a lot of times they keep things so vague that nobody can actually do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because what does developmentally appropriate means? What is age appropriate in this
Mm-hmm.
context?
Mm-hmm.
It's not explicitly defined. And so even with a bill like this, where they specifically say primary school, when you don't specifically define what age appropriate is, then you can add that to middle schools, you can add that
Mm-hmm.
to high schools,
Mm-hmm.
and then you are creating an even bigger problem. As well as, I understand that there are some exceptions in it that the bill does provide for teachers to hide certain information from a parent if they feel that it's, especially harmful for the child. However, again, they provide no clear, defined terms and conditions in the legislation itself. And so if a teacher says, hey, I didn't want to tell the parents because I feel like there's something going on there that could hurt the child. The parent can easily be like, I don't know why the teacher would think that of me. There's nothing in writing between us that would give them that impression. They're just making an assumption about me. And that's actually more hurtful to me. And that gives the homophobic, bigoted parent more fuel for their fire.
And I also think that in that same vein, Daquon, who's to say that the people or the teachers think that gay, what is it, conversion therapy is a bad thing? Who's to say that they think that the parent beating their child to be straight, thinking that that'll work, is a bad thing? Because if they don't think it's a bad thing, they wouldn't see that as a threat. So of course they would tell the parent anyway. So it's
Right.
in that same corner. It's like, if this is all just based off of the teacher's prerogative, then what if their prerogative is homophobia too?
Amen. Whew, now the table is always hot with current events and social issues, but sometimes the heat can get a little intense.
Just a little bit.
Just a smidge. So let's turn the temp down, take a breather, and get into this week's topic cool down. Andre, what do you have for us?
Well, Daquan, I wanted to ask you, do you think that there is a such thing as happily ever after in the real world? And what do you think your happily ever after would look like?
So I don't believe in happily ever afters in the normal sense that there is a happily ever after. I think that there can be multiplicities when we talk about happily ever afters. So that means that it's going to look different for each and every person. One person's happily ever after could be that traditional, oh, they got married, they had children, 2.5 kids and a dog, white picket fence, live in suburbia, happily ever after. Some people, that's not for them, and that's perfectly fine. Their happily ever after could be pursuing a career milestone that they always wanted to pursue. Their happily ever after could be getting in touch with themselves in a way that makes them feel like they really know who they are and know that what their purpose is. And so for me, my happily ever after would be something where I can look back and feel like I achieved my purpose on this planet, that I did something to help out the next person. I think that, if you believe in astrology, I have an Aquarius rising, and a lot of times Aquarius gets known as the humanitarian. And so I think that's an important part of who I am. I see myself as a very humanitarian type person. And so I want to be able to leave my mark on this earth, making it a better place, teaching somebody something new that they may have never known, teaching somebody to love themselves and be that representation that allows them to know that they are perfect the way that they are. There's no need to change to conform to society. And this isn't even like in an ego trip type thing where I want to have like this huge impact and everybody remembers me. No,
Yeah,
I just want to make this world a better place than I found it.
that's beautiful. Um, I don't know. I think for me, I think happily ever after exists, but not in the way that we've been taught. You see, I think my problem with happily ever after is that it's often used in place of a transitional period of life when it shouldn't be used as such. Like, just because you got married, had kids, reached a career goal doesn't mean it's happily ever after. I think the more appropriate term in that place should be being at peace. For me, happiness is a temporary emotion, whereas peace feels more permanent. If you're happy, you can become sad, but if you're at peace, you can still be at peace when you're happy or sad. You strive to reach a stage in your relationship or life or career where you're at peace with the ups and downs that life throws at you. And even when things aren't going well, your peace is never disrupted because you know that things will go well again, or you have the strength to get through it. Then, if you were able to achieve all the things that you hope to achieve, or at the very least, you gave it all to try, when you die, you lived happily ever after. And I think that my happily ever after would be knowing that I lived my life doing what I love most. It would be knowing that I never gave up on my dreams and pursued the highest highs of my career success. It would be knowing that even if I didn't end up with a romantic relationship, that my life was still so full of joy and so much love. It would be understanding and believing without a shadow of a doubt in my mind that I was enough.
Absolutely beautiful. And I also really appreciated the point about happily ever after being used for transitionary periods because I think that every time we see happily ever after in a fairy tale or a storybook, it's like case closed, ended.
Yeah,
But in that transition, before the story really ends, there are so many important things that can happen that cannot just be summed up in a happily ever after.
hmm,
So it's really important for us to think about when it comes to happily ever afters. Is it the true end, or are we just replacing some type of transitionary period? And learning how to love and explore these transitionary periods in your life, because I think that those periods can be where you find true peace and you get that permanent peace that cannot be shaken by the ups and downs of the world.
exactly. Now, so many children grow up never knowing the full scope of what their culture has contributed to society and history. And Daquon, I think it's time for a change.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. Now, Arthur Ashe became the first African American male tennis player to win the U.S. Open and Wimbledon singles titles. Ashe's resume includes 3 Grand Slam titles and the title of the first Black player selected to the United States Davis Cup team. In July 1979, Ashe suffered a heart attack while holding a tennis clinic in New York. His high profile drew attention to his condition, specifically the hereditary aspect of heart disease. In 1992, Ashe was diagnosed with HIV. He and his doctors believed that he contracted the virus from blood transfusions he received during his second heart surgery. Now, after Ash went public with his illness, he founded the Arthur Ashe Foundation for the Defeat of AIDS, working to raise awareness about the disease and advocated for teaching safe sex education. On June 20th, 1993, Ashe was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Bill Clinton after his death on February 6th, 1993.
I really appreciate hearing stories like that because so many times HIV and AIDS is just wrapped up as this gay disease. It's a
Yeah,
punishment for their crimes, a consequence for their actions. And no,
yeah.
it's much more than that. And so to hear how much he put into, funding AIDS research to, try to find cures and treatments and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
it's so humbling to hear. So, in an article published by Marie Claire, 18 Black History Heroes You May Never Have Heard of, we learn about Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler, who was the first African American woman physician in the United States. Born in 1831, Dr. Crumpler first worked as a nurse in Massachusetts between 1852 and 1860. She was accepted to the New England Female Medical College and earned an MD in 1864. She practiced medicine in Boston and Richmond, Virginia, primarily working with the poor who had limited access to medical care. In 1883, Dr. Crumpler published a renowned book of medical discourses in two parts, which many believe is the first medical text written by an African American author.
Black people.
Gotta
Black.
love a Black first.
Black. I mean, and I think it's so crazy. Like 18 in the 1800s.
Child.
Like, I mean, it just really just goes to show just how much, no matter what goes on, Black people and people of color will persevere. We will get through that shit because throughout, I'm sure, all the racism and bullshit she encountered, I'm sure she was like, fuck all these bitches. Huh. Fuck all these
amazing.
bitches.
I'm that bitch.
I'm that bitch. Oh, she was like, I was originally that bitch. We'll always forever be that bitch. Okay. Now, as always, thank you all so much for watching and keep that conversation going down in the comment box below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And if you are listening to us on our podcast, please rate and review on whatever platform you are using. You can also follow our podcast on Instagram and TikTok at the Melanin Margin for updates of new content.
And if you'd like to follow each of us, our handles are at Daquon, MUE.
And at Andre Talks a Lot Haney.
Now, we will see you all next week on the Melanin Margin, where our goal is always to bring the marginalized to the spotlight in any way we can. Goodbye now.